Hi, I'm Apostle Kathryn. Welcome to another episode of Revival is Now. On the previous episode, I shared what the prophetic word of the year is for 2023. You will see the promise fulfilled. On today's episode, you will be equipped to be able to walk into that promised land and stay strong in your promised land. In order to see the promise fulfilled, you must break the wall of fear and break the wall of insecurity. First of all, the promises that God gives us are blessings, are gifts. God does not have to give us these promises. The fact that He just gives us breath in our lungs and life eternally with Him, that's already so much. We're indebted to Him, we should not want for anything else. By that, I mean we should never feel entitled to other blessings, but we should really see every other thing that comes from God, blessing, promise, as such an extra beautiful gift that God has given us that we don't deserve, we are not entitled to, but it's just the mercy and grace of God in our lives. It's very important you see the promises and blessings in this way because in the world, it's natural for people to be entitled, about basics in life. Like it's the society norm that every person gets married, falls in love, gets married, has children, has a house, has a car. It's really like this expectation of this is what I deserve, this is what I'm entitled to. Maybe not everyone thinks they're entitled to a mansion and a really expensive car, for example, but so many people really feel like as a human they're entitled to these basic society norms. So that's just one example, and then many people feel they're entitled to so much more. Many people feel if they work really hard on their job, they better get paid really well. It's just this mentality, like, I deserve this, where it's true, like what you sow, you reap. We should expect these things, but we as children of God should not be like the world where we're ever entitled, where we ever think that because we did something, we should get something. But we should always have the mindset of, I'm a servant of the Lord. I'm rich. I have everything I could ever want in Jesus Himself. Everything else, all the gifts and blessings are extra. That's the mentality that God wants us to have. Because He does not want any of that entitlement, pride stuff there. So when God promises you something and you're on the journey to the promised land, actually one of the big things that God is doing in the journey to the promised land in your heart is getting that entitlement out. In the journey to the promised land, there's always a journey, and there's a journey because there needs to be this process that's happening. There needs to be a refining process that's occurring in your heart. Your character's being molded to be able to be Christ-like so that when the promise comes, you can handle that promise how Christ wants you to. So on that journey, God's refining your heart, and one of the things He's refining is getting that pride and entitlement out and putting that heart of a servant of God in you, that humble heart, that grateful heart, that generous heart, that when blessings come, you're not holding on to them tightly, but you're like, I'm blessed to be a blessing to others. I've freely received. I want to freely give. So I know that this happened to me. I had a humbling moment in this journey to receive the promise, a big promise that I've seen come to pass, or I should say, I guess, begin to come to pass, is to see revival break out in my ministry. I was called to be an apostle, and I was called to start a church, and it was prophesied to me that revival was going to break out through my ministry. Many miracles were going to happen. So many people would come, and miracles everywhere, and it would spread across the world. But for 4.5 years, I was seeing our church be so small, dwindling from 20 down to 5 to 2 over 4.5 years. So during this process, it was a challenge. It was difficult. I remember just longing for the promise to come to pass, just longing, just thinking like, man, I really thought the promise was going to come sooner than now, and this is difficult, and everything that I'm doing is just obedience. I never desired to preach. In fact, it was very uncomfortable for me. So that was just pure obedience. So much of these 4.5 years in that process time in the journey to in the journey through the wilderness to the promised land is me just like obeying and not a lot of fun. I had such peace and joy like never before because of this place of intimacy with Jesus that I never experienced before as I was obeying him and really surrendering like never before. But it was uncomfortable. And I was just constantly doing things that weren't fun and just longing for the promise to come to pass. So I remember one time it got hard. I think it was after a really big attack of the enemy again. And I just remember like crying and praying to God and crying and feeling like, when will this promise come to pass? Like I'm just anxious for it to be here, and just feeling this moment of like, I've done a lot, I've sacrificed a lot. And I remember feeling like I thought that since God called me to do something that I didn't want to do, that he was going to make it easier.